But what I really want to do with you guys today is talk about why self-awareness is important in the age of hybrid work. So we're going to explore a little bit about the lack of understanding we have in the workplace, how post-COVID-19, if I can say that, I mean, I guess we're still really much in it, how that's changing the way that organizations structure the workplace and how people get their work done. And then really start to understand, okay, what are the talents we need to thrive in these new environments? And really, how do we develop it? How do we grow as individuals, as teams, as leaders to make the most of these new opportunities? And as the name would suggest, the key kind of mechanism to make that happen is through by becoming more self-aware. So hopefully by the end of today, you'll kind of have a very clear understanding around some strategies and methodologies that you can start taking into your workplace to raise awareness in your organizations. So just to get started, Yanni briefly mentioned this, so I'll just kind of talk about it at a high level. Both myself and a few partners about 2 years ago now, we founded Deeper Signals really because we wanted to change the way organizations assess and understand talent. Typically what we see is that assessments are really kind of, the best assessments are really stuck at the top of the house, while more scientific and development focused tools really go undelivered to the rest of the organization. So what that means is a lot of people don't understand themselves, they don't get the feedback and the data that they need to become their best selves. And so we started Deeper Signals really to achieve that mission. And the way that we do that is using the science of personality, technology, and really improving like user experience and data. And the idea being, if we can marry these things together, we can not only get personality science in all parts of the organization, but we can actually start to help everyone become their best selves. And so we'll talk a little bit more about kind of what we do within the context of this presentation. So just zooming out for a second, I think it's safe to say that every day we experience a crisis of misunderstanding. Thousands of years ago, it was Socrates who kind of said, know thyself. And, we're still trying to figure out, how to answer that question and understand what really makes you, you. And this is kind of paradoxical, I think now, because while we live in this hyper-connected world, everything that we do is being tracked by some platform or another. And there's many studies showing that our digital footprints can predict and understand our personality better than our colleagues, peers, and even loved ones. Yet there's still this disconnect. When we look at kind of the fundamental problems that organizations face, they're more often than not people problems. And what I mean by that is leaders don't understand their people, managers can't understand their teams, and ultimately we don't understand each other. A lot of the times we find ourselves making silly decisions and then kicking ourselves, like, why did I do that? Why did I respond that way? And ultimately, we don't have good self-insight. And what we see is, if we can fix this problem, I'm confident that we can actually start to make more healthy, more compassionate, and ultimately more productive organizations and work experiences. And we can see the cost of this lack of understanding. If we just look at a few pieces of data. So for example, we know it's estimated around 75% of people are not working to their full potential. This is coming from a Gallup poll. And really what we can, how we can understand this is the fact that people are in jobs that aren't aligned to their interests, aren't aligned to their talents, and really not being fully exploited. And people don't have the opportunity to really realize and welcome the things they're most good at and feel most inspired by. Similarly, when we look at engagement data, again, coming from Gallup, we see that leaders ultimately just can't engage their people, right? We've seen this for years now. The amount of engaged employees continues to kind of stay at, kind of 60 to 70%. And despite all the kind of perks that we give people, all the kind of the flexibility that we've tried to give people, we still aren't seeing this budge. And ultimately, because we don't see this move, because leaders don't understand their own impact on their teams. They don't have an awareness into their own leadership styles, the way that they manage their emotions and make decisions, how that impacts the culture and the environment and the sentiment of their teams, which really erodes the engagement. When we look at kind of why talent is leaving, we see that organizations are hemorrhaging their top talent just because they're not being given the best learning opportunities or the opportunities to grow and develop. And so what we see here is an opportunity for organizations to understand what do their people really need to kind of help them feel engaged and ultimately retain that talent within their organization before it moves on to a competitor or even, starting their own business. And I think ultimately you can see that estimates by Tasha Eurich, a scientist out of Harvard, suggests that only 10% of people are truly self-aware at work. And so that's to say that we shouldn't be too surprised that we see this failing of understanding happening across, a variety of different aspects of the work experience. And that is because ultimately we just don't understand ourselves. When we look at studies looking at how we evaluate talent, we tend to overestimate ourselves. Like there's the Dunning-Kruger effect, many of you may have heard of. We're just not very good judges of ourselves and each other ultimately. And I can just see there's a few comments already about kind of the sources of these statistics. Most of them are coming from a Gallup poll, so I can circulate kind of the exact reports afterwards. And then, as I said, that 10% statistic is coming from Tasha Eurich. She has a great TED Talk that I highly recommend. Just moving on then, continuing with this theme of lack of self-awareness, we really see this most prominent in the realm of leadership. And I think this is kind of where self-awareness is needed most. Before COVID, I think it's safe to say we are already experiencing another pandemic. That's the pandemic of toxic leadership. And what I mean by that is leaders, micromanaging, bullying, and harassing their teams. I just typed in "why does my boss" into Google, and you can kind of see some of the top hits there. Why did my boss hate me, micromanage me, ignore me, pick on me, so on. I don't necessarily believe that leaders are mean-spirited people, but rather there is a disconnect between how a leader is conducting themselves and their awareness of the impact on their colleagues and on their teams. And I think that's something that we can definitely work with, and we can reduce that gap because it doesn't have to be this way. But again, just continuing this theme of toxic leadership, what we are seeing now is what's being called the Great Resignation. And so what that is describing is over the last 18 months or so, where people have had the opportunity to work from home, or they may have been furloughed, have had an opportunity to explore what really matters most to them, had a chance to reflect and ponder what inspires themselves. And we're starting to see an increase in self-employment. People are quitting jobs at a higher rate than before. And when we look at kind of the key reasons behind that, one of the biggest, and this is coming from a study by Microsoft, one of the biggest reasons is that they don't want to work for their toxic boss anymore. And so this really kind of speaks to that point around we quit bosses, not jobs. Moving on away from the lack of awareness at leadership levels, we can think about it from our cultural perspective, really around kind of D&I initiatives. So there's been a big push over the last few years and it continues to kind of build up that we need to create more inclusive and more diverse cultures. Yet, despite all the talk, all the consultants, all the research, and all the products being offered to solve this, we really aren't seeing much movement here. There's a lot of criticism that D&I initiatives are too shallow and not being effective enough, again, driving people away. It's estimated now 70% of people feel uncomfortable in the technology industry, for example, due to their identity or their kind of values not being represented in the cultural hegemony of that organization. And again, I think the big problem here is that leaders and people in positions of power don't understand the values of their people. They kind of have a very top-down approach to thinking about their culture, rather than understanding what are the values of their people and then working up from a bottom-up perspective. I think this is a really interesting point when it comes to culture, because we often think about it from a leadership point of view and the leaders set the values, when really I think we should be looking at it from every level of the organization, from individual contributors. What do they really care about? And that tells us the values. There's always a disconnect. I mean, when I speak to organizations, the leaders will say, okay, we have this innovative culture that likes to be agile and really flexible and so on. And really that's just kind of the leaders' preferences, because when you survey their team or their wider organization, they'll be much more rigid, much more traditional and so on. So again, there's this big disconnect. And then that only adds to not only slow down change, but again, get in the way of making more inclusive environments. And so the final thing that I want to speak about when it comes to change is the age of hybrid working, which I really do believe we're now in the middle of, and something that we're going to be seeing over the next few months to become, I hate to say it, but the new normal. And what this really means is, as we've got used to working remotely or pseudo remotely over the last 18 months, many people are reluctant to go back to the old way of working. People have got very comfortable not having their lengthy commute. People have got comfortable being able to be at home and get stuff done without having being drawn into all kind of the usual distractions that come about with working in the office. And of course, people enjoy saving the money, not having to commute every day, buy lunches and so on. They can be more affordable, spend more time with their family, have a better work-life balance. And so what we're seeing now is leaders increasingly trying to redesign how the office is structured and how the office is managed to account for the flexibility, to choose when, how, and where people work. And people really want this. I think there's still a bit of a discussion around whether people want to be truly remote versus being completely in office. As you can see by the two statistics that is shown on the screen here, we can see that 73% of people want to have flexible remote options. Yeah, a similar amount of people also want more in-person collaboration. And I think that's really important, right? People want the independence, the autonomy, the ability to choose, while also kind of still having the option of talking, interfacing, and working alongside their colleagues. And so, again, this is going to create a new challenge of understanding your team, because really, I think it's going to be much more a personal approach to kind of how you structure your team's work and how you manage them. I can see lots of tension. I think Apple is a great example here where, and it's not just Apple, it's many organizations where they kind of set a top-down approach to, to what extent the work is going to be hybrid, in person, or fully remote. And you see, large percentage of that population really like it, and similar amount kind of push against it. And so I think really to kind of structure your work properly in hybrid work, it requires leaders understanding, not only their team's needs, but each team member, like what's their values, what's their personality, what's their kind of life circumstances, and what's really going to work best for them. And so alongside that, this is obviously going to bring new challenges, not for leaders, but actually just for ourselves. What are the kind of skills and talents that we need to be able to thrive in this new environment? And how can we become more aware of that? So fortunately, despite this hybrid work push being very new, we already know a lot about what causes performance or talent at work. And really, it's a simple equation: personality and environment. Like, you got to have the right dispositions and values in the right place, and when you have that fit, you're going to thrive. And so when it comes to development, we already know, if you look at kind of the research showing who works best in kind of agile, ambiguous environments, there's already 3 traits that we know we should all be developing. The first is curiosity. So this is the ability to learn, grow new talents, and ultimately kind of invest in yourself to really have this hungry mind, to stay motivated and pursue and push yourself to learn new things and get stuff done. I think it's important when we're not in the work environment, in the office, it's up to us to kind of manage our own development and kind of deal with that ambiguity and kind of find our own way to navigate through it. The second trait we all need to be working on is empathy. I think this is really important, given that the ability to communicate is now going to be across in-person and virtual channels, right? So there's a lot of tension there, because I can't necessarily read your emotions, your behaviors in the same way that I would be able to if I was in the room. What we know from studies that look at really empathetic individuals, they're able to do this carefully. They're able to pick up on little micro actions and nuances and still relate, engage, and maintain relationships no matter what the channel of communication is. And this is really important, because if you think about what hybrid work offers, it's going to be a mix of some people being in the office, some people being at home, and those things being interchangeable. So the ability to be able to stay aware of those that are around you, have that collective intelligence, and then detect kind of potential sources of conflict, tension, and be more inclusive, I think is really, really important to kind of making hybrid work. The final one is openness. And I think this one is really obvious, right? When we're kind of facing this idea of restructuring the work environment, it requires us to be more flexible, comfortable with change and ambiguity. But it also is going to require us to come up with new solutions and then implement those solutions in a much more independent way, because we may not be necessarily sitting next to people in the office, or the only way we can collaborate is via Zoom, chat, or something like that. And so what we can see here is, and I can send some studies after this call with full references to why these dispositions are going to be critical for hybrid work. The key thing is that they're developable. We can develop them. We often think that personality and our talents are relatively fixed. I think there is a lot of conversation, and there are many studies showing that personality is a stable construct over our lifespan. However, what we do know from more recent research by Brent Roberts and his team is that if we get awareness and understand what our current baseline is in terms of our personality, our values, our skills, and then we have very targeted interventions that are focused on those attributes, we can actually produce sizable change. So Brent Roberts proved this out with a meta-analysis showing that our big 5 traits can be managed, can be grown, and that change still exists, well into the future. And so kind of bring this all together, we can see that before the pandemic, there was a lack of awareness and understanding. People struggled to get on with each other, understand each other, work together. And we can see the fallout from that, from toxic leadership, lack of inclusivity, people leaving, people not working to their full potential. Alongside that, we have now this new way of working that only is going to, if not carefully managed, could accelerate or exacerbate those issues. But the good thing is we can kind of navigate through this if we just become more self-aware. Self-awareness, is the baseline to all change, all growth. And so really, as an organization, as an individual, as a leader, we're trying to kind of get our teams in a new place and aligned with these new goals. This is one of the first things we should be working on. So I'm going to pause here to see if there's kind of any comments that I can just touch on. So someone mentioned around psychological safety, and that's critical. And we're going to talk a little bit about that in a few minutes. So if we're going to realize and build this self-aware workforce where, individual contributors understand themselves, their managers understand their teams and their impact, and then leaders understand their entire organization, we need to be giving people accurate and objective feedback. Because as the saying goes, we can't manage what we don't measure. And more often than not, we don't receive good feedback at work. Feedback only is delivered when it's too late, after we've done something wrong. It's normally emotionally charged. It is, usually fueled by kind of biases or, some other social agenda. Or the very best feedback typically stays at the top of the house, in that executives receive, an expensive coach. They can go on these long development programs, whereas everyone else, it's more of an afterthought. And so what I want to do now is show you 5 ways that you can deliver accurate feedback across each level. And so by doing so, you'll not only give everyone the opportunity to understand their own talents, but really understand that impact on their teams, on their leaders, on their colleagues, and actually have the resources needed to bring about that change. And Nicole, I think your point is 100% correct. This is all about kind of creating more transparency, more honesty, and kind of more candidness and respect. It doesn't need to be kind of brutally honest. That's not what it's about. It's about creating an environment where we feel safe to give people feedback and actually to receive it, to know that it's for our own benefit and the benefit of those around us. So you can kind of think about it as a selfishly, if I receive good feedback and how I can improve, I'm going to not only help myself, but you will also have the added benefit of helping those around you too. And I think given that we are going to be switching and this hybrid work environment is here to stay, managing and being a good collaborator, I think, is even more important, because we don't have kind of as much of a social contract where what we typically have if we was in person, where we can kind of manage our emotions, people can understand us in a more personal level. When we only know each other through our screens, having that awareness, being able to communicate clearly and honestly, I think is going to be really critical, because again, it's very hard, it's very easy to misinterpret words that are kind of just through an email or messages or something like that. So the very first thing that we need to do to build a self-aware workforce is to actually just democratize feedback, period. This is kind of like step one of the most important things you can do. The way that we see this is, the way that we see people achieving this is through talent assessment. And when we look at the data, more often than not, most employees, unless they're at the top of the house, don't receive good scientific feedback around their talents. This is because most assessments are not scalable because they're really expensive. You know how expensive some of them can be. We also see a lot of feedback from assessments is really static, it's hard to comprehend, it's overly technical. So as an individual contributor, I don't know what to do with these results. I don't know how to act out them. I don't know how to turn those insights into action. If you do get a good report and a good set of feedback from an assessment, you're going to need either a workshop or an expensive coach that can then take you through that process and help you build a plan around putting these things into action. And then finally, and I think this is one of the most important things, is as kind of HR practitioners, we have ignored user experience. If we look at kind of every other aspect of our lives, from our iPhones to our computers to any kind of online platform or service we use in the consumer space, there are hundreds of people working to understand the best way to optimize this digital experience. Even very simple things like where certain buttons should be, and then they monitor kind of how that impacts people's click-throughs and all those kind of things. When it comes to HR tech, we have this very top-down approach in that we just view assessments and kind of really any HR process as something that needs to be done to people. If we're trying to get people engaged in the feedback process and in the development cycle, we need to design technology that has the end user in mind, not just the administrators and the leaders that need that data and to kind of have that data feed into a larger process. And so really, the best way you can think about it, if we give everyone an assessment, a high quality assessment that is short and engaging, everyone then has an understanding of their baseline talents. Therefore, there is no excuse to kind of say, all right, I wasn't aware, I came across like that. People will know very scientifically, what they're really good at, how they help and add value to their team, while also have a much more attuned awareness into the ways that they can distract and negatively impact those around them, and also get in the way of themselves. And so really achieving this mission is one of the things that we do at Deeper Signals. We will work with an organization, we'll administer our core drivers assessment to everyone in the organization and really start working through this process. So the core drivers I'm using here as an example, but it's obviously not the only one. The key thing why I'm mentioning it here is that we've really started to put these principles into action. And so the assessment itself is incredibly well validated. We use machine learning to maximize the predictability and reliability. Because again, if we're going to be putting people down a path of self-awareness and development, we really need to make sure that the baseline we're giving them for them to act out and develop those plans for growth and development is, based on solid science and data. The next thing that we do really differently with the core drivers, which again helps with this, this mission of scalable insights, is the speed and the technology. So we use machine learning to keep it really short. It only takes around 5 to 6 minutes to complete, and it has a modern technology experience. And of course, there are other tools out there that offer a modern experience as well. But the key thing is, again, when we look at adoption rates, when we work through organizations, it's at like 99% adoption rate because people want to complete it and we make it easy for them to do so, rather than having a very old-fashioned type survey where people have to kind of click through one question at a time, hit next, and then they don't get a report at the end. The final thing that we do with the core drivers and here at Deeper Signals is give people a digital coach. So a big problem that we see with assessments is once you've completed it, you get your personality report, and then that's it. We don't give any kind of structure to helping people put those things into practice. And so we offer a digital coach that uses behavioral economics and behavior change theory and technology to start scaffolding that change. If I understand something about you, I can then start serving you nudges and content to bring about that change in an empirical and structured way. And so all this is to say that assessments don't need to be this one and done experience, but rather we can use technology in a way that is structured, thoughtful, and ultimately gets at this mission of giving everyone feedback that is actionable, in a more continuous process. I'm going to just skip this slide. You'll be able to see a copy of these slides after the call. But the main thing here is just, again, stressing the fact that if we're going to be investing in self-awareness and development, we need to make sure that it's based on science. And so the first step here is about using assessments that are built on, say, a Big Five type framework, because we know there's thousands of empirical studies to show that these different attributes are predictive of real-world outcomes across every level. So once you've assessed everyone in your organization, everyone now has a bit of insight into themselves. The next thing that we need to do is start to turn your managers into coaches. We kind of have this practice in organizations where if you're technically competent, we promote you into a managerial position because we think you are the best at that job, and therefore you should be the ones overseeing everyone else do that job. I see the rationale. However, that doesn't quite make sense, because if I'm a technical expert, I've spent my entire career becoming that technical expert, not necessarily to become a people manager. And so what we see is this disconnect between managers who are technically proficient but lack all EQ. And then how that then plays out is really all those statistics that I showed at the start of this presentation, where we have kind of toxic bosses who micromanage, who bully, harass, who drive good talent away. And so what we really need to do is turn our managers into coaches. We need to raise the emotional intelligence of our managers so they're much more interpersonally sensitive and aware of their own people's needs, but actually give them the tools and training so they can start to coach, nurture the individual talents of their direct reports. And I think there's 4 key ways we can make this happen. The first is, just getting people's mindset in the right place. I think it's really critical that coaches or managers, understand and communicate to their colleagues that they really have a belief or a sense of efficacy in their ability to grow and change. It's what we know from psychological studies where managers are kind of dismissive, uncaring, and kind of lack that belief. People quickly tune out, standards drop, people start to engage in counterproductive work behavior, and then eventually they leave. So the very first thing is actually just showing an interest and care for your people. It's so surprising when I hear people kind of talk about kind of how ruthless and uncaring their bosses are. I just think, if you're in a position of leadership, it's your position and your responsibility, sorry, to really help those along with you, because they're going to help you achieve your goal. Just trying to kind of crack the whip and be uncaring isn't really going to get you very far. The next thing is to practice what we call the 80-20 rule. And this speaks again to the point of having emotional intelligence in your managers. So it's about appreciating that growth is not linear. Just because you managed and learned something a little while ago and you find it very easy doesn't mean other people are going to adopt it, those skills or those concepts in the same rate that you are. And your goal is to, bring them on that journey. It's about displaying patience and really balancing this 80-20, which is, asking questions to providing answers. Your goal, like any good coach, is to listen, help them understand, what their own challenges are and what went wrong and how they can do better. It's not about the manager just kind of dictating what they should do next time. The third thing, as someone already mentioned in the comments, is psychological safety. And in fact, this is like one of the most important things a manager can do. There are meta-analyses and great research done by Amy Edmondson from Harvard that shows that psychological safety is pretty much the #1 predictor of team effectiveness. The reason why that is because it's a result of leaders creating an environment whereby people can speak up, share mistakes, kind of seek feedback, and know they're not going to get punished for it. If we have an organization or a team where it's very fear-driven, people are going to work to solve the problem, but they're going to quickly disengage and ultimately leave because it's very toxic. It becomes fear-driven, and everyone's worried about making a mistake. A good study some of you may have already heard of is one that was done by Google. They studied the performance of all their teams, and again, try to understand, why are some teams more effective and productive than others? And psychological safety was the #1 predictor. And then finally, it's about being a role model. We see from scientific studies whereby leaders who embody a sense of humility and modesty are ones that are willing to put themselves forward and seek feedback from their teams, start to create a culture of trust, respect, authenticity, so, as someone mentioned in the comments, that then kind of perpetuates throughout their team and their departments. And so if you want to become a manager that coaches others, it's about showing that vulnerability, as Reece just said, showing that you are vulnerable and willing to put yourself forward to encourage others to do the same. Again, that feeds nicely into creating that psychological safety and creating that supportive environment. Another thing that managers can do is to really think about the development plans that they're giving their colleagues and their direct reports. One thing they can do is create personalized development plans, whereby you really take into account the individual's personality and values, and then start to create a very clear plan around, what that awareness is, why it's important, how to turn that awareness into action, and then ultimately coming up with metrics to measure that progress, and then come up with strategies to change and adapt if things are working or not working. Again, performance appraisals and performance management is very kind of formulaic, top down. If you have all that data about your people because they've completed an assessment, you can really tune your approach. This idea of one size fits all, fits no one, really speaks to this point here. The next step is about building cognitively diverse teams. So you've given everyone an assessment, everyone understands a little bit about themselves. Your managers are working one-to-one to raise that awareness and to start shaping developments. The next thing you need to do is getting people to work together. Cognitive diversity really describes team environments where there is a wide array of different thinking styles, talents, and values. And what we know from studies by Suzanne Bell, who is a NASA research, she shows that teams that are more cognitively diverse solve problems quicker. They are able to view things from multiple perspectives. They're more creative and ultimately outperform their less diverse peers. And so the way to boost cognitive diversity is about understanding within your team who has what talents. So if I'm really flexible, who is really disciplined, in my team, and then work together, because we're going to have skills that balance each other out. A team that is very homogenous is going to work really well together because everyone, thinks and behaves the same, but there's going to be kind of gaps and shortages in those talents. They're great already at doing some things, but then, they may become rigid and kind of have these, they may miss big opportunities to kind of do something different or better. Whereas teams that are very diverse, okay, there's going to be some tension there because you need to manage all these different thinking styles and values and approaches, but you're going to get much more kind of synergy between different people's personalities. A good example of this is myself and one of my co-founders, Uri. Uri is incredibly flexible, whereas I am very, very disciplined, both to our detriments in many ways, but together we're a good partnership because we're able to balance each other out. I'm able to keep him on track and he's able to keep me flexible. And I think this is a really important example for me, and what we see in our teams, in our colleagues' teams, really play out as well. And we go back 6 months later after giving these types of workshops, helping them understand, okay, who would be a good partnership with who. We do see increases in performance and engagement, and ultimately people are way more cohesive. There is value in diversity. Once we have a structured environment to kind of understand that, people are much more willing to lean into it. And so the way that we can boost cognitive diversity, there's kind of 3 simple ways. One, again, giving everyone an assessment, understanding what talents you have where in the organization and how they fit together. The second thing is making more data-driven hiring decisions. So again, forgetting kind of the one-size-fits-all approach of what success looks like in a role, and actually start assessing an individual against their team rather than a standard rubric. Again, if you've got a group of engineers, you could come up with a very kind of formulaic process of what that profile would look like, but maybe you need to introduce some flexibility, some creativity, and other dispositions that kind of buck the trend. And then the final thing is really kind of sitting on leaders to kind of keep pushing against groupthink, kind of having that awareness that you have an echo chamber, that you have a closed network, and really pushing yourself to kind of reach out and expand your connections beyond your initial group or department. The final thing, the penultimate thing is at the leadership level, and it's about keeping them aware of their risks. So we spoke a little bit about this at the start around toxic leadership, and you may have heard some of this before, but really it's about understanding what situations and environments do we start to over leverage ourselves. So we all have gaps, we all kind of derail at some point, and we all kind of have these extreme aspects of our personality. The key thing here to start managing these is becoming more aware as to what situations trigger them, what we can do differently, and then ultimately keeping track of our progress on these on this path of managing our risks. This is much harder to do than the other stuff because it's really about kind of saying at our darkest times when we really struggle to control ourselves, that's when we need the most self-awareness. And I'm sure you can all attest, we've all done things that we regret because we lack that awareness in the moment. And, when we look at kind of leaders, this is coming from research from my colleague, Thomas Tremoro, who looked at incompetent leaders. We see that the main traits here that kind of lead to people over-evaluating themselves and engaging in risky behaviors is narcissism, kind of having an overestimation of one's ability, kind of being overconfident, and then typically relying more on charisma than competence. And interestingly enough, we do see these things actually play out more in male leaders than female leaders. So I think we can zoom back out for a second and say, if we was to start managing leaders a bit better, selecting them on better attributes, and ultimately helping leaders keep their risks in check, not only will we have more effective leaders, but chances are we'll also have more representation at the top levels of organizations. One thing I do want to mention, just really about the science behind extreme behavior, is the latest thinking in how extreme personalities and risky dispositions are manifested. So typically, or traditionally, we think about these things as being categorical, in that you either have something or you don't, or you have to reach a certain threshold before it becomes problematic. The latest kind of thinking from Thomas Widger is saying, actually, it's really a function of too much of a good thing. And the dark side of personality is really a function of the 5-factor model. And these dispositions manifest themselves at each end. So just like how there are pros with being really extroverted or really introverted, there are also gaps associated with those things too. Same with openness, agreeableness, conscientiousness, and so on. The good news here is that you can then start to understand someone's strengths, how they typically behave using a 5-factor tool, and then also understanding their gaps as well. So if you have a toxic leader, what are the things that you need to be doing to kind of help them keep their risks in check? The first is getting them to admit and identify what risks they have. And it's really important to stress that we will have them. And again, I think if we have that psychologically safe culture where there is the opportunity to give feedback, no, you're not going to get punished, this becomes a lot easier to do. I see in my own organizations that I work with, cultures that are really defensive and hostile, we never get past step one. The next thing is to really understand and explain how they not only impact your colleagues and those around you, but also your ability to perform. If you explain that these dispositions, these risky behaviors are going to get in your way of achieving your own goals and drive away those people closest to you, people are again more motivated. Again, identifying what situations trigger those extremes, start introducing a very small micro action that can bring about that change and start mitigating these gaps. Again, a micro action is just something very, very small that you can practice each day. And with repeated practice, you start to get big changes. This is really inspired by behavioral economists. And if you're looking for a really interesting and easy way to get into this, James Clear is a great author that really summarized a lot of the research around micro actions. And then finally, step 5 is holding yourself accountable. So what we know from behavior change research, if you bring in kind of a degree of social accountability by seeking feedback, telling people you're going to do something, and then having them either do something with you or kind of even just be aware that you are trying to change, we are much more likely to follow through with those commitments. Again, because we're trying to protect our egos and we're more likely to commit to things. It's also a good thing if you're trying to become a bit more healthy to kind of do it with someone. And so again, what we can do with organizations is create more peer coaching, more environments to more opportunities to coach and work together in their own development. So again, if you have all that data, you can then start to place people that are similar, that have similar goals, similar needs, and actually have them work together. Again, that's something that can be really, really powerful and start to embed these ideas of self-awareness into your culture. The very final thing I want to talk about, and I know we're kind of running out of time here, is about ignoring your intuition and making more data-driven decisions. So you've assessed everyone, you're working on your managers, working on your leaders, working on your teams. The next thing you need to do is to create a systemic approach to reinforcing feedback in a continuous way. We know from the relationship between interview evaluations and the prediction of job performance. We know from studies, again, like Dunning-Kruger, which I mentioned before, we're pretty bad at making forecasts and predicting and evaluating talent. While we may feel comfortable trusting our intuition, at scale, it leads us kind of down unproductive alleyways. And now we're actually in kind of this fortunate age where, given everything is digital, and because of hybrid is going to be creating more text, more digital footprints, we can now use AI and different technologies to collect data, to mine it in real time, and really understand the sentiment of our people, to start to understand what are the shifting values and talents within our organization. And what that then gives leaders the ability to is be a bit more preemptive, to understand, okay, if I have this strategy, how is it going to align with the people that I currently have working for me, and what I need to do to kind of close that gap. And again, the key thing here is, you can't change things, you can't reinforce this culture if you don't have data. And ultimately, what this really means for you guys as HR practitioners is that we all need to become more data literate. The future of HR is definitely around analytics. People are still going to be important, but we're increasingly seeing a whole shift towards more data-driven decision-making and practices. And so what we need to do as HR practitioners is, upskill in how to collect data, how to interpret it, how to model it, and ultimately how to enact it as well. Just a few examples of things you can do here by integrating psychological data with traditional HR analyses and data points. You can predict engagement above and beyond kind of typical processes. What we know from meta-analyses that 50% of the variance in engagement is driven by personality. We can map out the social networks of organizations. That then helps us develop social capital. It helps us build more inclusive environments because we can see how decisions are made and then the homogeneity of those networks. And then ultimately, it gives you a good understanding of your culture, which you can then manage in real time. So just to kind of replay that, self-awareness is important. It's the foundation of change. We need it more than ever. We need it to solve the problems that we were facing before the pandemic. We need it now even more so as we move into hybrid working as well, which is only going to add new challenges to communicating, to managing, to getting our work done. The steps we take is giving everyone an assessment, really raising that awareness at scale, and then turning that awareness into action by improving the coaching potential of your managers, helping them have EQ to really get the most out of their people, building more cognitively diverse teams where everyone kind of understands how they contribute to the performance and the well-being of their team and its potential, keeping your leaders in check and helping them manage their risks. And then finally, around creating a data-driven culture that reinforces these decisions. And so just to kind of close off, I want to help you all on your own self-awareness journey. And so if you follow this link that's on the screen, and I know Yanni and Colby are going to be sending this link around, so don't worry if you don't grab it right away. You can actually complete that core drivers assessment that I mentioned at the start. So that will give you access to not only your personality in just a few minutes, but it'll get insight into your own core risks. So when we talk about kind of the unhelpful aspects of a personality and what you can do to change it, we get feedback there. We get feedback around how you as a leader can manage others, your potential within a team and the way that you add to the cognitive diversity. And then ultimately, you will also get a digital coach to help you start putting some of this into practice. So with that, I know we've only got 5 minutes left, but I just want to say thank you for listening to me. I hope you found it interesting, and I would love to take any questions that you may have.
Reece, thank you so much. That was enormously valuable. And by the look of the chat room, with everybody's commenting, thank you so much for everybody else's interaction. I do want to see if we can make use of this 5 minutes. Are there anybody, thank you, Fawn, also for your comment around that this was an excellent presentation. Zander, I do see your hand up. Would you like to ask maybe 1 or 2 questions?
Reece, yes.
Hey, Zander.
Always an incredible privilege to listen to you. I wish we could have the rest of the day, to be honest. There's so much that I would have loved to ask. Yes, you referenced Brent Roberts' article previously.
Yep.
And I've read it a way back, and I just want to check a few facts and run a hypothesis past you to see its merit. So if I recall correctly, at least from my therapeutic point of view, you do see more change in trait neuroticism from an intervention point of view.
Yeah.
So my question would be, yes, and we've recently done a convergent validity study among employees between the sort of the big 5 and its relationship to the dark triad. And it seems as if neuroticism compared to sort of other traits almost plays like a role throughout. And I wonder if it's like a spider web, if you develop something here and help with sort of emotional control and intervene on that, it might replicate to the rest of your profile. What's your views?
Absolutely. The way that we see it is your neuroticism, so we call it passionate versus stable, is like an attenuator for feedback, for self-awareness, and ultimately change. What we do see is that those people that are typically on the lower end of that scale, so we would describe them as being more passionate, are actually more coachable because they're much more sensitive, much more self-critical, they're much more interested in getting better. Whereas those people that are really, really stable because they are so relaxed, calm, cool, collected, they're much harder to kind of bring around as to kind of why they should change or why they may want to change. So yeah, I think like when we're giving feedback as managers, as leaders, as coaches, look at kind of that emotional regulation scale or that level of passion versus stability to kind of see where they are, because that will then really inform the rest of that person's development profile and development journey.
Thanks, Reece. Appreciate it. Always a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Very kind.
I see Megan's got her hand up as well. Let maybe one more question. I also do see that there are some people leaving already, but Reece, if you can assist us with Megan's question as well, it would be great.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Hi, Reece. It's awesome to meet you. So my question's around, I mean, the personality. So I know the big five, obviously, and then you get obviously above and below the waterline in terms of iceberg theory. So if you look at motivation, I use Enneagram a lot, which I'm sure you've heard about. So now you're combining all these assessments and you come up with a profile for candidates or for individuals. What about adult learning theory? So often I find that adults, sometimes leadership says they want to develop, and then they get their results, and they need to, obviously with the role modeling, go on the development journey so that that cascades, cascades to the lower levels. But if they're in a state of, if they're less mature from an adult development theory point of view, I mean, they're not going to role model any of this. There's going to be a blockage. Like you were also talking about narcissistic and toxic leadership behavior. What I'm trying to say is, like, you can't force you can take a horse to water, but you can't force them to drink. How do you go about getting that buy-in or helping or convincing them that this is important for the whole?
Mm-hmm.
Because it's not really about them. It is, but not to such a, because if you're a leader, it's about selflessness, and about making sure that you are leading by example. So have you come across clients that are I don't want to say stubborn, but they
yeah, definitely. I would completely understand, and I agree, and we do experience those people too. I think the key thing is just trying to meet them where they are. So rather than explaining, if they are stubborn, rather than explaining to them how this will benefit the organization, chances are, because they are much more kind of self-centered and interested in themselves rather than kind of this larger abstract kind of thing, which is helping the organization achieve its mission. What we try to do is keep it much more tangible and much more local by kind of saying, Megan, what do you really care about? What would you like to achieve? What would you like to change? How would you like to become a better version of you? And by keeping it much more focused on them, you can then start to slip in other things that they should be doing to then improve their team and improve their organization. So you kind of start very local, saying, okay, I would love to become a little bit more calm and relaxed because, I'm just anxious all the time. Okay, yeah, great. We can help you do that. And by doing so, you then have like these knock-on effects, because that leader is going to be less anxious, more calm, more collected. The team is going to benefit from it because they're no longer going to be walking on eggshells and really nervous all the time because their leader is nervous, and so on and so on and so on. So I guess it's not about kind of trying to get them bought into like the larger ideal, but rather kind of get them focused on themselves. And then you as a coach, as a leader, whoever's kind of leading this process, can then start to kind of steer that process so it starts to have a much more of a cascading impact.
Okay. Thank you so much. That's very helpful. Appreciate it.
No, thank you for the question.
I know that we're 1 minute past. I just want to double check. Is there any other person that would like to post a question? Because you're also welcome to send us an email afterwards, and we can send that through to Reece. As Reece already mentioned, we will be sharing the slides. There will also be an email post this session in the next day or 2 or 3, where we will be sending through a quiz together with an evaluation form that will earn you a CPD point for those of you who are after the CPD points. We will also then reach out with the links that Reece have so generously provided in making this available to all of us to trial and go through ourselves. So we will be sending you through all of that information, and we can also reach out if there's any more questions or any other thing that you would like to ask. So I think I do see Eloise Bekers, you're also asking about comparing the efficiency between a digital coach versus a high-touch coach intervention. I can imagine that that must be a fantastic study to embark on as well. I don't know, Reece, if you've got a question, a comment on that question.
Yeah. I mean, it's a very good one. What we do know is the adoption of the digital coach is really, really high. People engage with it. I think people are really just excited, especially at more mid-level and junior levels of the organization, to have a coach, whether it's digital or in person or whatever. They're just happy to have feedback. People are starved for it. And I just happy that their company is investing in their own development. I think, we can talk about kind of the efficiency maybe on a later call, but I think it's less about kind of the medium, but more of the fact that you are giving feedback, period. I think that's the key thing. Go back to the very start of this presentation with the lack of understanding. You can just give someone something, you'll be surprised at how impactful that can be.
And I absolutely am. I can just, I agree. We earlier today, we had 2 interviews with a different project that we're busy with, and both of the candidates highlighted the fact that they've done a psychometric assessments before, but they've never received feedback. So they've got no idea what their areas are to develop. And there's multiple reasons for it, and I don't think we can go into that now, but I can imagine that any feedback, digital or then high touch, if that's likely the first prize, but would be valuable for many people.
Exactly.
Reece, on that note, I don't want to keep you up for longer. I know that it's 8 o'clock at where you are at the moment. We highly appreciate your time. As I said, thank you everybody else for joining as well. We found this really valuable, and we will definitely be talking to you soon again, Reece, and thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you, Yoni. Thank you for having me, and thank you everyone for joining, for the questions, for the participation. I really enjoyed my time with you today.
Wonderful. Enjoy your day. We're knocking off now.
Yeah. Enjoy your evening. Okay.
Yeah.
See you
Thanks
later,
so much.
everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.